Today's Monday, and I'm reacting to all the Week 11 games, plus all the fancy studs coming right up. What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Gridiron Fantasy Football Podcast for Monday, November 23rd, 2020. And I'm Chip, and I'm your host, and thank you so much for listening today. If you're a new listener, thank you so much for joining us as well. If you'd like to share our podcast, you can find us over on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. If you'd like to watch us, you can watch us over on YouTube at Gridiron Fantasy Football. So do me a favor, hit subscribe, hit the bell so you don't miss any more episodes. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about all of the Week 11 games, plus all the fancy studs for Week 11. But before I do that, let's go on to some of the news. And the biggest news that came out Sunday was Cincinnati Bengals rookie quarterback Joe Burrow. He's going to be out for the rest of the season due to a torn left ACL. That's the initial report. He had tweeted out that he will see us next year, so he obviously knows how bad the knee is. Now, my only concern is this a multi-ligament issue? It looked like, based on the video that I was able to see, it looked like it was at least his ACL, but it could have been his MCL and his medial meniscus, is what we call the unholy triad, which is, when you see that, if you saw the replay, you saw his left knee just cave inward. And I would be surprised if he didn't, tear anything else in his knee, but it looked bad and kind of a gut-wrenching thing too, because you never want to see a player, especially a rookie, go down like that. It was one of those plays where, quarterbacks are usually protected pretty well, and unfortunately, players rolled up onto his leg and tore his ACL, which, to all my Joe Burrow fantasy owners out there, we pour one out for you. I'm one of them. I lost Joe Burrow. I'm in a 2-quarterback league, so I am now sitting with Big Ben and Sam Darnold on my IR because he has not been active the last few weeks. So it definitely takes a hit to people's fantasy rosters, but, that comes last. His health comes first. I hope that he is able to recover from this. I hope that he's able to come back next year. He will come back next year. So, he doing it now in November, he has plenty of enough time to recover, rehab, and get himself back on the field for week 1 of next week. So that's not a concern. It's just we're still waiting for the official MRI results to determine how severe the knee injury was. But Joe Burrow is out for the rest of the season. And then moving on to Juju Smith-Schuster. So this was an odd injury because I was watching the Pittsburgh Steelers game, and I saw Juju run off the field, and he hit what it looked to be a flag on the field, and it rolled up on his ankle, and he had to go to the sideline going down to his knees. So not sure exactly what the severity of that injury was, but he did somehow, he didn't return to the game after that. So he's a guy that you want to continue to monitor going forward. And once again, Julio Jones, he's dealing with a hamstring injury. He didn't play majority of the second half, but this is the problem with players that have hamstring injuries. It's a hard thing to overcome. If you don't give it the right time to rest, you're going to now be limited and then are very likely to re-aggravate it. So this is what's going on with Julio Jones. I'm just wondering exactly how that's going to play out going forward. Hopefully it was just a minor re-aggravation. He's able to come back. And the New York Jets running back Michael P. Ryan, he hurt his ankle on Sunday against the Chargers. He did not return, so something to monitor as well. And then last, Rex Burkhead of the New England Patriots, he suffered a knee injury. Some of the initial reports coming out that he has a ACL injury. So if that is the case, he will be out for the rest of the season. So just, it seems like every week we got something happening. We got something going on where we have multiple injuries to well-known players, and it just sucks. This year sucks in the sense of injuries alone. I mean, I've never watched a season where I saw so many big names get hurt. So hopefully, fingers crossed, no more players get severely injured like this, so that we can go on the rest of the season with some clean injuries. So we know that's not going to be the case, but it's always hopeful. But going on to now, my favorite segment on Mondays is the top plays for Week 11. This is based on next-gen stats. And for this week, the fastest ball carrier was Pittsburgh Steelers defensive back Mika Fitzpatrick. He ran 21 0.01 miles per hour on his 37-yard interception return. So actually, to see a defensive player, you really don't see that often. We always see pretty much an offensive player doing this, obviously, but he got up there in speed and he was the fastest guy this week. And then the longest play goes to Pittsburgh wide receiver Ray McCloud. So this was a pretty funny play to watch. He grabbed a 13-yard reception, but to get 13 yards, he had to run 109.1 yards. So a little overdoing it, but he still got his 13-yard reception, but had to run a hell of a way to get it. And then the improbable completion, this goes to Aaron Rodgers to Marquez Valdes-Scantling. This was a completion percentage of 12.1% on his 47-yard reception. So this was the play that happened later in the game where the Packers were coming back and, Aaron Jones just chucked it and then found MVS for this reception. So pretty low percentage this week. And actually, that's probably the lowest we've seen in a few weeks, as we've been hovering around like 15-16%. And now going on to the remarkable rushes. Nick Chubb, on his 54-yard rush, he was only expected to get 4 yards, so he ran 50 yards over expected. So, this is another cool stat to kind of see where a player gets stopped near the line of scrimmage, and then he's able to create more yardage after that. And then the fastest sack goes to Yannick Ngakoue. He sacked Ryan Tannehill in 2.3 seconds. And that Baltimore game was a pretty good game, pretty physical. A lot of stuff went on before the game at midfield, which I always find entertaining because we always want to see, there was some bitterness between the Baltimore Ravens and the Tennessee Titans from last year. The Titans were able to knock them out of the playoffs. And, this is like the exact game that you want to see, is just physical games being played and just that tension from, what happened last year. So now let's go on to the Week 11 games. And we're going to start off with the Browns versus the Eagles. Man, the Eagles are just a mess. They lost to the Browns 22-17, knocks them to 3-6, and now the Cleveland Browns are 7-3, and they're pretty much look like a playoff team. So good for the Browns. They're winning games that they should be winning. So that's good for them. But Carson Wentz, man, he continues to struggle. He's only this offense. I don't understand. Like, this is something that I'm trying to wrap my head around, because this Eagles football team has a good team. Like, offensively, they have the weapons, and it's just continuously mind-boggling to see how the Eagles continue to struggle. From a fantasy standpoint, he did have 2 touchdowns, but other than that, he had 2 interceptions. He was sacked 5 times. So, not the thing that you want to see from a quarterback that you drafted high in fantasy. Now, on the Cleveland side of the ball, Baker Mayfield, this is one of the guys I felt like could have been a good streamer this week. He leads with only 204 yards passing with no touchdowns and no interceptions. But just one of those things where Baker Mayfield, all he has to do is give the ball off to Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and they create the offense. So this is what we're looking at. But from a fantasy standpoint, nothing great out of him. Miles Sanders, a little bit of a disappointment, to be honest with you. He carried the ball 16 times for 66 yards. But he did have a fumble, near the goal line. So, that would have been a lot different if he had the touchdown. But just one of those things where Miles Sanders, it's trying to figure out exactly where we're going to go with this this player, because he has all the skill sets to be a good player, but then we don't know exactly how his offense is going to run, if they're going to be behind and whatnot. He always plays better when they're ahead and winning the games, and they just haven't been doing that as of late, pretty much at all this whole season. So it's just really hard for Miles Sanders to be fantasy relevant. And then, Nick Chubb, he had 20 carries for 114 yards, didn't score, but Kareem Hunt had a great touchdown. I know if he also had a touchdown in the beginning of the game. He tried 3 times and came short 3 times. But he got his touchdown later on in the game where he jumped over a player and got into the end zone. So he at least scored. Wide receiver, Dallas Goedert for the Eagles, the tight end, he was good, 5 for 77 and a touchdown. It was a garbage time touchdown, but from a fantasy standpoint, he still gets you a score. And then Jalen Reagor, he was 4 for 52 on 5 targets. So, him and Dallas Goedert, they were the 2 targets leaders for the game. We did see Richard Rodgers. He did have a touchdown as well. On Cleveland's side of the ball, pretty ugly game overall for Landry, Hooper, Kadero Hodge, he was the one who led the team with 3 receptions for 73 yards. He had 5 targets. Austin Hooper had 5 targets, but he was 3 for 33. So just a very interesting game overall, just from the passing and receiving standpoint for the Browns. So, but the thing is, the Browns, they won the game. They got their win. They're 7-3. So good for them. And now moving on to the Falcons versus the Saints. Now the Saints won this game 24-9, and I had tweeted out earlier on in that game where I felt like the Saints for this team definitely looks a lot different with Taysom Hill at quarterback. They do a lot more gadget stuff. I mean, we saw Alvin Kamara in the Wildcat. We saw him taking snaps. We saw Taysom Hill doing his thing. But like, this is one of those games where, I mean, Taysom Hill, from the quarterback standpoint, he was 18 for 23 for 233 yards with no touchdowns and no interceptions. However, he had 2 rushing touchdowns on 10 attempts. So this is the controversy going on with Taysom Hill this week. In ESPN leagues, he was designated as a tight end. So a lot of people played him at tight end. So regardless of how you look at it, he was either one of the top tight ends in fantasy or he was one of the top quarterbacks in fantasy because he had his 2 touchdowns. And it was a low week for overall just points from the quarterback position regardless. But, you know, it's one of those things where it probably is not going to happen next week. They're going to rectify that. They're going to change it over where we know that Taysom Hill is going to be the starting quarterback. He's going to be only quarterback eligible. So I think that's going to change. But on the Falcons side of the ball, Matt Ryan, not a very good game. He had 232 yards and he threw for 2 interceptions. So, you know, this is something we see with Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan has these ebbs and flows of games he does well, games he doesn't. I mean, the Saints, don't get me wrong, are a good defense, so that's something that you have to consider as well. But Matt Ryan, I mean, he definitely was not good yesterday. Todd Gurley, he was not good. He was 8 for 26, no touchdowns. I mean, overall, this was just a bad offensive game from the Falcons, not scoring a touchdown at all. And the Saints, this was an interesting game too because like I'm an Alvin Kamara owner. And I'm sure for a lot of Alvin Kamara owners out there that this was the game that we're trying to figure out, okay, how does Alvin Kamara look with Taysom Hill at quarterback? And now Alvin Kamara, he did rush for 13 yards for 45 yards. He had 13 carries for 45 yards and a touchdown. But this was the first game in his NFL career they didn't record a reception. Like, he had no receptions at all. He only had 1 target this game. So this is what I'm concerned about with Taysom Hill at quarterback, is that Alvin Kamara is the guy who gets those dump-off passes from Drew Brees. He's a guy that excels at the passing game, and he wasn't used at all. So the Saints did win the game, but still, from a utilization standpoint, Alvin Kamara is just, if he's like this for the next few weeks while Drew Brees is out, I don't know, that's concerning. That concerns me for what his upside is going to be if Taysom Hill continues to get these touchdown runs and everything like that, because it really takes away from Alvin Kamara's skill set from a receiver standpoint. So we'll see going forward. But on the Saints, from the wide receiver standpoint, Michael Thomas, he had a good game. You know, he had 9 catches for 104 yards, didn't score. He had 12 targets though, so that's good to see that. We saw Emmanuel Sanders, he was 4 for 66. Now we looked at the Falcons. Calvin Ridley, he was 5 for 90 on 9 targets. Russell Gage, 12 targets. He was 7 for 58. And then Julio Jones was 2 for 39. So he obviously was going in and out of the game because of the hamstring issue. So that's why his receptions and everything are so low in his target, because he just wasn't in the game fully. The one thing I'm kind of disappointed about was Hayden Hurst. Hayden Hurst gave you a goose egg. I played Hayden Hurst in my league. He's my main tight end. He only had 2 targets with no reception, no yards. So just a overall, like I said, bad game for the Falcons. And then going on to the Bengals versus the Washington football team. Now this is obviously a tough game because, you know, the Bengals lost Joe Burrow. The Washington football team won this game 20-9. And man, this like I said before in the beginning of the podcast, like, this is a gut-wrenching thing to see a player of so much talent, who's a rookie, who's the first pick overall, doing great for a rookie quarterback in his rookie season, and you see him go down like this. It's tough, man. It deflates you. You know, it deflates you as a fan, as a football fan, and just for the Bengals and for him. I mean, just seeing that, it sucks. But he did score. He was able to throw a touchdown to AJ Green in this game. Alex Smith, he was really just kind of low key. He had 166 yards and a touchdown and interception. Ryan Finley came in, didn't do anything for the Bengals. He was 3 for 10 for 30 yards and interception. I mean, the Washington football team have a stout pass defense, so wasn't expecting Ryan Finley to do much once he took over for Burrow. From the rushing standpoint, Antonio Gibson, he was 16 for 94 and a touchdown, so that was a good game from him. J.D. McKissick, he was 6 for 43. He had only 4 targets, which was very odd because he was getting double-digit targets. He only had 4 targets in this game. Terry McLaurin, he was 5 for 84, so not a bad PPR game from him. You have Tyler Boyd, he was 9 for 85. AJ Green was 4 for 41. And then T. Higgins, he was 3 for 26 on the 10 targets. So, the target share, we're all going to see kind of how this goes forward for the Cincinnati Bengals receivers, because obviously with Joe Burrow in there, obviously T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, and AJ Green, I'm going to see their upside is going to be tampered a lot because of Joe Burrow not being the quarterback. But it's just one of those things where it's just unfortunate, injury, and hopefully he comes back strong next year, and we'll be able to see what he does hopefully in a full season. Now moving on to the Carolina Panthers versus the Detroit Lions. The Carolina Panthers were able to shut out the Lions 20-0. And this was overall just kind of a underwhelming game. From my perspective, I mean, the Lions were able to do anything. I mean, they didn't have Kenny Galladay, they didn't have DeAndre Swift, and this whole offense for the Lions just was awful. I mean, Matthew Stafford, 178 yards with no touchdowns, no interceptions. He was sacked 5 times. Adrian Peterson, he was 7 for 18. He did lead the backfield, but still, he got you nothing when it comes to fantasy points. TJ Hawkinson, not bad for a PPR standpoint. He was 4 for 68 on 7 targets. Marvin Jones was 4 for 51. And then you look at Carolina's side of the ball. I mean, PJ Walker, not bad for his first NFL start. He had 258 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. We saw Mike Davis. He was 19 for 64 for a touchdown, which was good for him. And then DJ Moore, this was his top target. This was PJ Walker's top target. He was 7 for 127 on 11 targets. And Curtis Samuel, he was the one who got the touchdown. He was 8 for 70 on 10 targets. So if you are a Curtis Samuel owner, you played him. He gave you a bad game last week, but this week he came back around and gave you, a bunch of points. So good for your person who started him. And then Robbie Anderson, he was 7 for 46 on 9 targets. So overall, this was kind of a low fantasy relevant game, just because the Lions just didn't really do anything. So moving on to the Jags versus the Steelers. The Steelers won this game easily, 27-3. Now that Steelers team is 10-0, which obviously is a great start for them. Hopefully be able to keep this going. I mean, it's always fun to see undefeated teams going on later in the season, and they have the makeup to be able to continue that. I mean, they have some tough matchups going forward, but I do think the Steelers could make a run for it if they continue to play like they're doing. Their defense is just outstanding right now. Big Ben, he did pretty well. He had 267 yards with 2 touchdowns and an interception. Jake Luton, there's really nothing to say about him. He had 4 interceptions yesterday. James Conner, not a bad game, 13 for 89. Didn't score. Benny Snell got the touchdown, but still, from a fantasy standpoint, not bad. He gave you 13 for 89 on the ground, and he gave you another 3 for 10 in the air. So overall, not an awful PPR game. And then James Robinson, he was 17 for 73. He was the only running back to record any type of rush, so that's good for him. He gave you another 2 catches for 21 yards. And this is actually, I was expecting I had low expectations for James Robinson this week. I had played Miles Sanders over James Robinson just because of the matchup. I generally play James Robinson initially, usually over like every game, but I felt like the matchup was a lot better for Miles Sanders. And honestly, I was actually surprised on the game that James Robinson gave you. I mean, it was not the best PPR game, but enough to where you're like, okay, well, I got 11 points out of him. That's better than I expected. So that's kind of how you look at it. When it comes to the wide receivers, Deontay Johnson, he continues just to be the target monster for the Steelers. I mean, he was 12 for 111, no touchdowns, but he had 16 targets. Chase Claypool, he was 4 for 59 with a touchdown on 8 targets. And then Eric Ebron, he was 4 for 36 with a touchdown and 7 targets. Now, Juju, he went out early because of the injury, so his target share was a lot lower, but Deontay Johnson is, without a question, the number 1 wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then going on to the Jags side of the ball, DJ Chark, he was 4 for 41 on 8 targets. And overall, I mean, not really much going on with the Jags wide receivers. I mean, like I said, a bad game for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And it looks like Gardner Minshew will be back next week. So that means that we will see, hopefully, a little uptick in that offense overall. Now, going on to the Tennessee Titans versus the Baltimore Ravens. Now, this was a very good game. This went into overtime. The Titans won this game 30-24. You know, it was one of these games where, you know, you're watching it and it was kind of slow to start. Then all of a sudden, as the game progressed, you saw a lot more stuff going on. But Ryan Tannehill had a decent game. He had 259 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Lamar Jackson, he was 186 yards with a touchdown and an interception as well. But he gave you another 51 yards on the ground. When it comes to Derrick Henry, he had 28 carries for 133 yards and a touchdown. He got his game-winning touchdown in overtime. It was a matter of time that Derrick Henry was continuing to just kind of to wear out this defense. And when they needed him the most, he was able to get that touchdown. Now, J.K. Dobbins, you know, this is the backfield that we weren't sure exactly how it was going to play out between the carries. This was J.K. Dobbins' game where he had 15 carries for 70 yards and a touchdown. Based on this game, it looks like they're going with J.K. Dobbins going forward. I mean, Gus Edwards only had 3 carries and Mark Ingram only had 2. So if you look at that, I think that J.K. Dobbins, if you're a J.K. Dobbins owner, or if you're someone who owns a couple pieces of that Ravens backfield, that J.K. Dobbins is the safest pick. And then from the wide receiver standpoint, Corey Davis, great game from Corey Davis. 5 receptions for 113 yards and on 7 targets. A.J. Brown, I had benched A.J. Brown in my own league for T. Higgins because of the matchup. And I feel like I may be regretting that because he was 4 for 62 and a touchdown. His touchdown that he had, it was just beast mode into that end zone. Like, he caught the ball and was able to drive his legs and get himself into the end zone. So good game from A.J. Brown from that standpoint. Mark Andrews, he came alive. You know, he came alive during this game. He was 5 for 96 and a touchdown. So, you know, it's one of those things where when you have Mark Andrews as your tight end, you're going to have those up and down games. And this was a game where Mark Andrews came out and played. So that was I mean, he plays every week, obviously, but like this was a game that he finally got the targets and got the yards and the touchdown for you. And then Dez Bryant, this was surprising. Dez Bryant, he actually caught his first NFL pass in quite some time. He was 4 for 28. He had 5 targets. And then Marquise Brown, I got to bring him up because he's a guy that I recommended to sit. He was 0 for 0, right, on 3 targets. So Willie Snead, he was 3 for 23, so not much better, but you know, it's just one of those. I think Marquise Brown, I'm not sure what's going on with Marquise Brown. I don't know if it's just he's just not as physical or he's able to get himself open. I know he's a fast receiver, but I'm just wondering why he just is unable to get open or become that guy that we thought he was going to be when he came into the league. So we'll see. Now going on to the Patriots versus the Texans. The Texans won this game 27-20. Overall, I mean, Deshaun Watson. This was Deshaun Watson's game. I mean, he was 344 yards on 2 touchdowns. He gave you another 6 carries for 36 yards and a touchdown. So he was the fantasy quarterback of the week. He was the number 1 quarterback, and this guy is just he continues to play well. He's a guy that even though he's not. This is what we want to see with Deshaun Watson, right? We want to see when he doesn't have the talent around him like he did with DeAndre Hopkins and everything like that, how he's able to play and take over games. He took over that game yesterday. Without a question, Deshaun Watson showed why he's one of the top quarterbacks in the league. And I hope he continues to play with that mindset because he took over that game. He got them to a win, so good for Deshaun Watson. Cam Newton, he had 365 yards and a touchdown yesterday. He only ran the ball 3 times for 6 yards, but not a terrible outing for Cam Newton, but not something that probably won you a week. Damian Harris, he was not bad yesterday. It was a concerns if he was going to play or not. He was able to play. He was 11 for 43 and a touchdown. Duke Johnson for the Texans, with David Johnson being out, Duke Johnson's the starter right now. He had 10 carries for 15 yards, so 1.5 yards per carry is not going to get it done. So that's why you kind of see Deshaun Watson take over. He was able to make some yardage and get a touchdown. And I mentioned earlier, Rex Burkhead, he left the game early with a knee injury, and like I said, it looks like it's ACL, so very concerning for him. And then when it comes to the New England wide receivers, Jacoby Myers was the guy that I told you guys to pick up because he was the guy getting the targets. And then he only had 3 targets. He was 3 for 3. He had 3 receptions for 38 yards off of 3 targets yesterday. Damiere Byrd looks like, he was the target. Well, him and James White were the target leaders, but Damiere Byrd was 6 for 132 and a touchdown. So, it's one of those things where, what are you gonna do? I mean, they're trying to find different weapons, and with Jacoby Myers being the guy that was getting the majority of the targets, they went with somebody else, which works for them. N'Keal Harry, he was 5 for 41 on 8 targets. So Cam Newton is distributing the ball to whoever's open, and I think this is a good thing. That's why it's so hard from a fantasy standpoint to determine who's going to be the guy, because for the last few weeks it was Jacoby Myers, and now we see a shift in target share. So we'll see how that plays out going forward. For the Houston Texans, Brandon Cooks, he was 4 for 85. He had 5 targets. Jordan Akins, the tight end, he was 5 for 83. Will Fuller was 6 for 80. So, overall, I mean, same thing. I mean, the players that you are hoping to do well for the Texans, they didn't score you touchdowns, but at least they gave you some PPR points. Then going on to the Dolphins versus the Broncos. Dolphins won this game 13-20. The Broncos won this game 20-13. And, Miami Dolphins were on this winning streak. They were doing pretty well, and they just didn't have it. We saw Tua get benched because of performance. Ryan Fitzpatrick came in. He was trying to, ignite that team, but that's just not enough. So Denver Broncos walked away with the win. Like I said, Drew Lock, not a very good game. He was this was a guy that was dealing with a rib injury, but he came out and he played, and he threw for 270 yards. He contributed to their win. Like I said, Tua had a bad game. He only threw for 83 yards and a touchdown. On the rushing standpoint, we had Melvin Gordon. Of course, the game where I felt like Melvin Gordon, he was kind of going on the down. He was kind of going downhill with his playability in a sense. And then you look at it, he goes for 15 for 84 and 2 touchdowns. So this was a lopsided week, it feels like. But Melvin Gordon ended up doing his thing. And same thing for Philip Lindsay. I mean, this is a 1-2 punch. Philip Lindsay was 16 for 82. He didn't have a touchdown, but you see that he's getting involved where it does take away from the upside of Melvin Gordon. This is what I was talking about on the podcast on Friday, was that if Melvin Gordon gets all those carries, you see a big difference on how you can use Melvin Gordon, how you can trust that he's going to be a guy that you can play every week. But if Philip Lindsay getting 16 carries, I mean, the biggest difference is the fact that Melvin Gordon had the 2 touchdowns. So overall, I mean, they're running the ball very effectively yesterday, and it showed. For the Dolphins, not a lot really going on in the backfield for them. Salvin Ahmed, he was 12 for 43. He had another 5 receptions for 31 yards, so if you had played him, you got some PPR value out of that. From the wide receivers, Devontae Parker, he was 6 for 61 and a touchdown on 9 targets. Mike Gesicki, he was 4 for 43. For the Broncos, Tim Patrick led the team with 5 receptions for 119 yards on 8 targets. So him and Jerry Jeudy both had 8 targets. So, this is what you kind of expect. You expect when Jerry Jeudy is the number 1 wide receiver for them right now, Tim Patrick is the guy that's going to get the lesser of the coverage, which gives him more opportunities. So I think overall that was a good game from Tim Patrick. Noah Fant, he was 4 for 55. He keeps on being nagged by his ankle injury, so I think that he will eventually be a really good fantasy relevant tight end. But as of right now, I mean, that's not a bad for a tight end. Based on how tight end production has been all year, that's not a bad outing for a tight end. Now moving on to the Jets versus the Chargers. The Chargers won this game 34-28 and makes the Jets 0-10, that much closer to possibly Trevor Lawrence going forward for the top quarterback next year in the draft. Joe Flacco, he was okay. He was 205 for 2-1, so he's a guy that you probably plugged and played. He's a guy that, Sam Darnold is supposed to be back next week, so Joe Flacco being just kind of that plug-and-play type of player didn't do bad for you if you're playing a 2-quarterback league and needed a quarterback. But Justin Herbert, once again, showing up, 366 yards passing for 3 touchdowns and no interceptions. I mean, this guy, I watched this game, he was on the red zone, and this guy definitely has a rocket for I mean, there are some passes he's making, it's like, holy crap, this guy has extreme arm talent. So Justin Herbert continues to be the fantasy, rookie stud of the year in a sense of like from the quarterback position, because he's just, regardless of who he's playing, he continues to show up and play. And I'm getting to the point where I feel like he's starting to be matchup proof, where he's just going to continue to do well. He has the targets around him. He has Keenan Allen. He has Mike Williams. He has Hunter Henry. So I think that this continues to be a trend going forward. For the wide receivers, I mean, Keenan Allen, massive game for Keenan Allen. What's weird about this, I saw him drop a pass, which is very rare, but 16 receptions on 145 yards and a touchdown on 19 targets. I mean, Keenan Allen, if you own Keenan Allen, you're just sitting pretty, because this is a massive, massive game for him. And he continues to be that guy for the Chargers. And I can't imagine that going anywhere other than injury or anything else. But Keenan Allen is just a stud wide receiver, and he doesn't get enough recognition for that. Mike Williams had a good game. He was 4 for 72 and a touchdown. Hunter Henry had a touchdown. For the Jets, I mean, Denzel Mims, he was 3 for 71. Brashad Perriman was 2 for 54 and a touchdown. And Chris Herndon, I haven't played. We're going to talk about him for a while, or ever. But he was 2 for 32 and a touchdown on 3 targets. So overall, I mean, from a rushing standpoint, Kalen Ballage, it was interesting because Justin Jackson hurt himself in the beginning of the game when he went out. Yesterday, Kalen Ballage went out like on the second play of yesterday's game, but he came back and he rushed for 16 for 44. So he is the lead guy. There's no question that they want Kalen Ballage to be their lead back, because Josh McKelly, he only got 4 carries for -2 yards. Tremaine Pope, he only had 3 carries for 4 yards. So it looks like if you have Kalen Ballage, you're sitting pretty good in the sense of where you're going to be at when Austin Eckler's coming back pretty soon. So obviously, with that being the case, you can still pay Kalen Ballage probably for the next couple of weeks, but at least you know that he is the lead ball carrier for the Chargers. Now going on to the Colts versus the Packers. This was an interesting game for me, because I had a feeling that the Packers were going to struggle in this game based on how good the Colts defense is, and it was looking pretty good for the Packers. They were pretty much going through that game without any issue, and then they couldn't get things to stop. So I mean, they scored majority of their points. Obviously, they scored 28 points in the first half, and unable to score. They only scored 3 in the second half. So like, it is one of those things where the Packers need to kind of figure things out, because they can't continue to give up leads like that. I mean, the record had shown that when any point of the game that Aaron Rodgers is losing or behind, he doesn't have a good winning percentage coming back from those losses or those leads. So it's one of those things where I had a feeling that the Colts would win this game only because of their defense. But it was a close game. Obviously, it was an overtime win for the Colts. But Aaron Rodgers, he did Aaron Rodgers things. He had 311 yards and 3 touchdowns and interception. Philip Rivers, he was 288 yards for 3 touchdowns and an interception. So good fantasy outings from both quarterbacks. Aaron Jones, he had a pretty quiet game. He had 41 yards on the ground and a touchdown. Jonathan Taylor, I mean, this is the frustrating thing about like waiver wire pickups and Nyheim Hines, right? Because Nyheim Hines was getting the majority of the carries. Did you look at what happened yesterday? Jonathan Taylor had 22 carries for 90 yards and whatnot. So like, I'm assuming he's healthy now, so it looks like Jonathan Taylor's back on being the guy who leads that backfield. But good to see for people who own Jonathan Taylor. He had another 4 catches for 24 yards. Nyheim Hines, he had 6 carries for 2 yards, but he did give you another 3 receptions for 31 yards. So not a lot there going on with Nyheim Hines if you played him in your flex. But the good news is that Michael Pittman Jr. had 3 receptions for 66 yards and a touchdown. Now, he only had 3 targets, but he did lead the Colts with receiving. The good thing about this was T.Y. Hilton. So T.Y. Hilton, he had 6 targets. He was 3 for 36. So obviously not as much as Michael Pittman Jr. because he had the touchdown, but he led the team in targets. So that was good. What was very frustrating with this was, Trey Burton scored a touchdown. Jack Doyle scored a touchdown. But like, if you played somebody at tight end this game, you weren't sure. Like, you probably played Trey Burton if you had to, but Trey Burton had 2 catches, Mo Alley Cox had 2 catches, and Jack Doyle had 1 catch. So you really trust a tight end going forward when it comes to like just their volume. I mean, it is very hard to determine like who's going to be that tight end for that team, and who's going to get that score. But for the Packers, Devontae Adams, he was 7 for 106 and a touchdown, 8 targets. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, he was 3 for 55. Now, one play gave a majority of his yards, so he definitely did not have as good as a game as it suggests based on the stats. But he's a guy that, I think is to start losing some of his fantasy appeal going forward just because Allen Lazard is back. Robert Tonyan, he was 5 for 44 and a touchdown, so it's good to see him come back and get a score. The good thing about this is Allen Lazard, he came back. He only had 2 catches for 18 yards, but he had 4 targets. They had said that they were going to kind of sprinkle him into the offense. They're not going to give him a full load, so that was good. So it was good to see Allen Lazard back because if you had held on to him, it's good to kind of see maybe a bump in your wide receivers if you need them. And then going on to the Cowboys versus the Vikings. Now, this was a pretty entertaining game. I mean, I'm surprised that the Vikings lost this game. The Cowboys won 31-28. But Andy Dalton, man, he played well. This was a totally different Andy Dalton that we saw in the first game. He had 203 yards with 3 touchdowns and interception. Kirk Cousins had a good game. He had 314 yards and 3 touchdowns. Ezekiel Elliott, he ran pretty well. He had 103 yards, but Tony Pollard's the one who had the touchdown. Dalvin Cook, another Dalvin Cook game, 27 carries for 115 yards and a touchdown. And he gave you another 5 receptions for 45 yards. So good game from Dalvin Cook. Amari Cooper, he led the team with the Cowboys with 7 targets. He was 6 for 81. CeeDee Lamb, 4 for 34 and a touchdown on 6 targets. This is what we're hoping to see because we didn't know exactly how the value of the Cowboys were going to go down in sense of like fantasy relevancy. And the play that CeeDee Lamb had, now overall he did have a decent game, but if you look at the touchdown, that touchdown pass was, or that reception that he had, was one of the best touchdown catches I've ever seen. I mean, I know we talk about like Odell Beckham Jr. and all that stuff, but this catch was, if you didn't see the replay, go watch CeeDee Lamb's touchdown catch. I mean, this was by far the top catch of the year. I mean, just the way he was able to contort his body and change direction and just get himself in position to catch that pass was crazy. And then on the Vikings side of the ball, Adam Thielen, great game, 8 receptions for 123 yards and 2 touchdowns on 11 targets. And Justin Jefferson he was 3 for 86 and a touchdown. So overall, good game for your fantasy players. I mean, it's one of those things where this was that matchup where they both have pretty, subpar defenses. So I think that we're hoping for a good fantasy outing overall. We got that. Now moving on to the Sunday night game, the Chiefs versus the Raiders. I know the Raiders lost this game 35-31, but the Raiders are a very legit team. They are very good, and I think that they definitely could make some noise if they're able to make the playoffs because they can pass, they can run, they played good physical defense, so I think that they have a chance to do something. I mean, this is the second game that they played the Chiefs, and they gave a run for their money both times. They lost the first game. The Chiefs lost the game the first time, and they won this game, but if they didn't have Patrick Mahomes on that side of the ball, they were not going to win that game. But Chiefs came up, they won, got that last-minute touchdown, so good for them. But Patrick Mahomes, good game from him. He had 348 yards and 2 touchdowns and interception. Derek Carr had 3 touchdown passes, so good game from him. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he was 14 carries for 69 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, Le'Veon Bell had a touchdown as well. So, it was good to see that. It was good to see Clyde Edwards-Helaire have the majority of the backfield carries and get the touchdowns. Josh Jacobs, he had 17 carries for 55 yards and a touchdown. So, not a bad fantasy outing for those guys. From a receiving standpoint, Travis Kelce was a monster yesterday. He was 8 for 127 and a touchdown and 10 targets. Tyreek Hill had 11 receptions for 102 yards and a touchdown on 14 targets. So, I mean, if you're a Tyreek Hill owner or a Travis Kelce owner, this is what you want to see. You want to see your guys be the number 1 and number 2 in target share and be the guy they're scoring the touchdowns. So, I mean, I was watching that first drive, and Tyreek Hill had 14 points. I have Tyreek Hill, so I know the stats. He had 14.7 points on that first drive alone. And he had 5 catches and a touchdown, and I was like, okay, this is going to be a massive Tyreek Hill game. I was hoping for more of it. He did score 27 points, so don't get me wrong, but I do think that, you see someone score so many points on the first drive, like, okay, this is going to be a massive game for him, and then it slows down a tad bit, but overall, good game for the Chiefs wide receivers and tight end. And then on the Raiders side of the ball, Nelson Aguilar, he led the team with 6 receptions for 88 yards and a touchdown on 9 targets. And Darren Waller, he had 7 receptions for 88 yards and a touchdown. So overall, good game for the Raiders receivers, and just a good game at all. Just a very entertaining game. So that was good for Sunday Night Football viewers. All right, so now moving on to the fantasy sets for Week 11. We're going to start off at the quarterback position, and barring any type of performance on Monday night, we have Deshaun Watson. He was the number 1 quarterback for this week, with Justin Herbert being second. And then Taysom Hill, he was the 3rd best quarterback for this week. So regardless if you played him at tight end or quarterback, you had a top position regardless. So that was, and then Kirk Cousins was 4th. He had a pretty good game. And then going on to the running back position, from a PPR standpoint, Dalvin Cook, he led the backfield with 25 PPR points. I mean, it seems kind of low, doesn't it, when we talk about 25 points being the top score for the week for a running back? But that's how it was. And usually we usually see guys in the 30s, but maybe it's just obviously the projection of kind of, or the perspective of what we've usually seen week in and week out. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire was second with 20.7 PPR points. And then Derrick Henry was 3rd with 20.2. So, like I said, a lot of decent running backs for this week. I mean, the scores were pretty much, you didn't see a huge gap of like studs to the middle people, in the middle of the road guys. You saw 25, you saw incrementally them going down like further and further, but there wasn't like this huge gap of points being scored. And then at the wide receiver position, Keenan Allen, he led all the wide receivers with 34.5 PPR points. Adam Thielen had 32.3. And then we saw Tyreek Hill with 27. So those were the top fantasy receivers for Week 11. And going at tight end, so obviously Travis Kelce led the tight end position at 26.8 PPR points. Darren Waller was second with 21.8. And we had Mark Andrews round out the top 3 at 20.6. So, it's good to kind of see, because last week the top tight end was 13.1 off from Rob Gronkowski. So it's good to kind of see, this is kind of generally what you see. You see the top guys do what they're supposed to do, and you see kind of lower points after that. But overall, pretty good for the tight end position from a fantasy standpoint. But well, that's it for all the fantasy studs and for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening today. And we still got one more game to play. We still got the Bucs versus the Rams, and this is going to be a very interesting game because they both have very good defenses. A lot of fantasy players are going tonight, so this could alter a lot of outcomes for this week. I know for me, I am up by just under 30 points, but my opponent still has Chris Godwin, Rob Gronkowski, and Darrell Henderson, but I'm playing the Bucs defense, so I don't know. It's going to be close. I'm 10-0 in this league, and I'm concerned that I'm going to lose for the first time this week or for this year, but it's one of those things where I lost Joe Burrow too, so I figured, might as well just, when it rains it pours type of situation. But for you, what do you have left going tonight? Who do you have to play? Let me know in the comments below. But that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening today. If you like to follow us on social media, you can find us over on the Gridiron Pod on Twitter and Facebook. We're at Gridiron Fantasy Football on Instagram. So please hit subscribe so you don't miss any more episodes and help support the show. But tomorrow I'll be back for my waiver wire show where I talk about all my top waiver wire pickups for Week 12. So good luck tonight. Hopefully you're able to win, and we'll see you tomorrow. Take care.